Let's show our appreciation for the worship team. Didn't they do well this morning? Those were some very upbeat songs that we got to sing there. Thank you so much, everybody. Morning, everyone. How are you all today? Nice to see you. If you don't know me, my name is Gary, and you can tell from my accent, I'm Esher, born and bred. No, spent 39 years in Africa before coming here. It's lovely to see you all here this morning. When I was a teenager, I started riding horses. And I was learning and coming on pretty good. And eventually my dad consented to buying me a horse. So one of his business colleagues had some horses he was selling. So there was a local stable in our town where horses were kept. And he said to my dad, bring your son and let him come and try one of these horses that I'm selling. So I went down very enthusiastically, got down to the stable yard. And there they had got this horse ready. And the businessman was, of course, a businessman, so he was very forthright and bold and courageous. And he said, come on, get on. And we've put some jumps up in the arena. He jumps, so you can try him out for some jumps. So I got on top of this horse and perched myself on the saddle. And I had learnt a few things about riding. And the first thing I clocked was these stirrups feel awful long. So hands up if you don't know what a stirrup is. I have to educate, okay? A stirrup is the thing you put your foot in, okay? So your legs hang down the side of the horse and you put your foot in this little metal thing. It's a stirrup, holds your feet in place. So I thought, I don't feel so sure about this, okay? These are feeling awful long, but I'll give it a go. So I pulled up the reins and got on the horse and I messed around a bit and rode him around. And I managed with the long stirrups for a period. And then the cajoling came, come on, jump. So I said, all right, so I positioned the horse for the jump. This is where the story gets progressively worse. So the saddle wasn't quite what I was used to. The stirrups were a bit long. So I flew over the first jump, and in the process, I lost one of my stirrups. So I'm now 1 foot flapping in the air, not feeling very secure on the horse at all. However, full gusto, we'll head for the second jump. So we head to the second jump, and I'm not in control very much at this stage. Go over that fence, and in the process, lose the other stirrup. Seem to go flying in the air, let go of the reins to grab onto the saddle. And as the horse lands, now I have no control left over this horse at all. So the horse, feeling and sensing the freedom, decides, this is time to go home. So we were in one field, there was a gate at the end of it, sharp right turn into another field, dirt road to another gate, and the stables were on the other side of that gate. So he, as any sensible horse would do, decided, let's go home. So he belted it. Now I'm clinging for dear life on the saddle, no control. Belts it through the first gate, sharp right turn, and it's Africa, right? We have lots of dry dirt, gravelly roads. There's this dry dirt gravelly road to a gate which then has to be opened to go into the stable block. So he sees the gate and he takes off full tilt, full gallop down this road. I'm sitting there, and do you know what goes through my head? He is going to try and jump that gate. He's not slowing down. I am sitting 5 feet high without any control, and he's going to jump 4 feet over a gate, which is going to position me about 10 feet in the air. And I decided, nope. And then I made one of the dumbest decisions I've ever made in my life. I decided to abandon the horse and leap off in full flight onto a dirt road. It didn't end very well, and I didn't look very pretty when I finally got up. And to crown it all, to add insult to injury, the horse stopped at the gate. How many of you can remember disastrous decisions that you've made in your life? How many of you have learned through life that decision making can be very difficult, right? It can be difficult. I, as a person, have been a person who's never found decision making easy. And I suppose we all have our different reasons as to why we would find decision making difficult. For some, it's a lack of self-confidence. It's like, I don't know what decision to make. Sometimes it's information overload. You don't know which choice to make, especially in our social media age today, where everyone has got an opinion, and there are about 1,000 different opinions out there, and it's hard to know what to think, what to believe, and how to make a choice. And sometimes it's because we're scared of making the wrong decision. And I think what can make that difficult, folks, is if ever we've had a catalogue of wrong decisions, it can make you very hesitant about making decisions, because we learn in life that there are consequences to our choices. I heard it said once, and it's true, it said, you and I are free to make any choice we like, but that doesn't mean we'll be free of the consequences. Correct? It's true. I think I had a terrible wake-up call with this when Hazel and I were newly married. We had a house that had an enormous shade tree in the front garden, which you absolutely need in Africa for shade, but there were a lot of other fairly big trees around the perimeter of the property, and it made the house quite dark. So as an enthusiastic new husband, I woke up one day and I said to Hazel, I'm going to get some light into the house, okay? We're going to leave this nice big shade tree in the front garden, which will do us. I'm going to chop all the other ones out. So out with the saw and got some help, and we just proceeded to chop down about another 3 shade trees. So we got light in the house. It was good. So a couple of weeks later, I walked out into the front garden. I looked up at this big shade tree, the one shade tree that was remaining, and there was a whole section of it had died and withered. That's strange. About a week later, another portion of it had died. So I charged off to the Forestry Commission, who are the expert on all these indigenous trees, and I went and said to them, this is the tree I've got. It's a Cedrilla chula, okay? Parts of it are dying. What can I do to fix this? And they said, oh, no, that's what happens when they die of old age. Just chunks start dying. So I said, so what am I supposed to do? And he said, well, chop it down before it falls on your house. So I looked at him with absolute aghast, like, that's our only tree left. I've chopped all the other ones out. Hey presto, we had no shade from then on. That. Do you know how long it takes to grow a tree? I was devastated. And from that moment on, I just began to bring in the handbrake on my impulsivity and making decisions, saying, I've got to find a way of making right decisions here, not ones that are going to leave me with terrible consequences. And yet, you know, when you do get a decision right, oh man, it's good. When you make a right decision, it builds your confidence, it builds into your whole life a pattern of success. You learn to create solid problem-solving skills in your life, because you're able to face something that's challenging or difficult, make the right decision, and that leads to growth and success. Do you know, it's hard to describe the pressure we were under in our last couple of years in Zimbabwe of trying to work out what to do when there's so many bad things that happened to us, and there was chaos, and the only conclusion we eventually could come to was that we would likely lose everything to get out the country. It was an extremely difficult decision to make. But you know what? It was the right decision. And it's proved to be the best thing for us. And so you can make right decisions. But you know where I think it's difficult, folks, is I think decision making can be tricky at the best of times, but it's more tricky when the pressure is on. When you're under pressure, whether it be relationally or in work or in some other way, when the pressure is on you, it is very difficult to make the right decision. Because a lot of the times we just want to go by that which would make us feel better, or that which would just give us immediate relief. And we can make impulsive decisions which long term are not in our best interests. And so I feel for any of you here today who feels under pressure about making decisions. My heart goes out to you because it's more difficult then. Do you know what? We saw a tragic story which is hard to tell because it must have been so painful for the people involved, but it really woke Hazel and I up hugely. In our last couple of years in Zimbabwe, everyone was immigrating. Anyone who could was escaping to get out the country, and New Zealand had opened its doors. And so people were just selling up everything and taking off to New Zealand and trying anything to get out the country. And one family decided they were going to go to New Zealand. They sold their house, packed up, and left. Now, the problem in Zimbabwe was dealing with Zimbabwe currency. If you sell a paid-for home, by the time you convert that currency to New Zealand dollars, you've ended up with the price of a sofa. That's all you've got left. So people were making huge sacrifices. So they sold up everything and took off to New Zealand. Do you know what happened? 3 months later, they were back to nothing because they couldn't cope with the adjustment. It didn't work out the way they thought it would. And I'm sure you can probably all relate to things like that, where you make a decision and you find that it actually was the worst decision. So folks, somehow in life, not only when we're under pressure, but just generally speaking, we have to find a way to make good decisions. Listen to this quote, Corrie ten Boom. It's challenging and it's extremely stern, and possibly when you think through her story, you might find out why she said that. She said this: "Your decisions determine your destiny." Your decisions determine your destiny. I think in part that's true, not all the time, but I think definitely in some circumstances it can be. What pressures are you facing at the moment? What decisions do you need to make? How are you going to make decisions in the situation you're in? But more than that, just generally in life, how are you going to make decisions? I wanted to maybe take this week and next week to just talk about this because, gee, it's hugely important for all of us. How do we make choices? And I wanted to touch today on just a beautiful verse in the Bible, which I love when you start talking about how to make decisions. I love this because it's full of tenderness and compassion. And these were words that Jesus spoke. And it would be as if he was speaking to you today and seeing your pressures and your difficulties. And he speaks these tender, loving words. So folks, I tell you what I've called my message today. I've called it, "When the Pressure is On, Making Decisions in Difficult Moments." Okay? So I'm going to try and lay not the entire foundation, but a foundation for how to begin to decide how to make choices in life. Okay. So we're just going to look at 3 verses. That's it. But I'm going to try and go through them slowly so that we can dissect them and really think them through. Okay. We're going to look at Matthew 11:28-30. You would have come across these verses and seen them before. They are beautiful, heartfelt, compassionate words. So Jesus says this. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. How many of you feel touched just hearing those words? See, when someone speaks like that to you, with tenderness, humbleness, compassion, it touches us. They are beautiful words. So we're going to go through this slowly and work it out. Okay? Try and make sure we don't miss anything. All right, let's start off with first question. Who's he appealing to? All right? So he says there, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. So he's appealing to the people who are weary and burdened. What does it mean to be weary? We've all been weary, right? Weary is when you're struggling. The pressures are on. You're faced with difficulties and difficult situations in your life. And you just find the whole thing draining. Maybe you've got choices to make. He says, see you. If you're weary, I'm appealing to you. And I particularly like the other word used there when it says, you who are burdened. I'm going to make an appeal to the men here today. How many of you men, and it applies to women too, but I'm just gunning for the men, okay? How many of you men know the burden of wanting to provide for a family, work a job you don't necessarily like, keep the chin up when you're feeling rubbish, and just having to keep going because that's the burden you carry in life? You ladies will have that same burden yourself too. Sometimes it's the weight of everything we carry in our lives can just feel extremely heavy at times. Many people today are dealing with these things. Anxiety, worry, overwhelmed by life's demands, expectations from family, friends, work, employers, business demands. And so he makes his appeal to people under pressure. I just think it's beautiful. Okay. So what appeal did he make to them? Come to me. Come to me. Do you know, folks, I find in life there are two types of people when you're under pressure. And they relate to you in one of two ways. There will be those that stand at a distance and throw stones. And there will be those that come to you with arms open wide to embrace you, to see what they can do to help. That's the appeal of Jesus here. He says, come to me. Why would he say that? Why would his opening words be, come to me? Do you know, folks, when we did some counseling training in Zimbabwe, they taught us one thing that I've never forgotten. You know what they said? If ever you want to help anyone, if ever you fancy yourself as a counselor or an advisor of some kind, you know what they taught the first goal is? To help someone to end their aloneness in their suffering. End their aloneness. Don't let them suffer alone. And they said there is no greater suffering in life than suffering alone. How many of you found that? That is the worst. So the first thing he wants to do is to end the isolation and aloneness in the difficulties and the weights and the burdens we carry. And he says, come to me. Now that is a challenge, because what he's really saying is, hey, don't just tough it out. Don't just try and act tough, man. Why don't you be honest and open and just come to me with those things? You know, folks, listen to this. I believe this to be totally true. I don't know who said this. It's true. Listen to this. It says, to share your weakness is to make yourself vulnerable. To make yourself vulnerable is to show strength. And yet we're taught the opposite often in life. Don't show vulnerability that shows you're weak. Not according to Jesus. He says, come to me. Show your vulnerability to me. I'm good with that. And it takes enormous strength to do that. Do you trust him? Do you trust Jesus? Do you trust God? You know what I've learned in life? He's the only person you can be safe with. The only one. Because he never fails. Okay, let's move on. So what did he offer them? He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. What does he offer them? And I will give you rest. He would do something in our soul to ease those weights and burdens that we're carrying. Somehow he would refresh us, help us to make it lighter and easier. So you know what I think, folks, and I believe this to be fundamentally true. If he can make what you're carrying lighter and easier, then the only safe conclusion we can come to is that you and I were designed to be in a relationship with God. Because it's easier. It's not harder, it's easier. So whatever you can do to prioritize faith in your life, to learn how to have a relationship with God, how to draw closer to him, is the best thing you can do in your life. Because that's what we were designed for. Okay, so what does he then tell them to do? So he moves on from that. He's given the invitation. Maybe people started walking up to him to say, I'm up for this. Now what? In verse 29, he says this. And we need to think through this. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. So two things. Take my yoke upon you. So if I were Jesus, this is what I'd be saying. Reach out your hand. See this wooden yoke I've got here that fits around your neck. Reach out your hand, take the end of that yoke, and put it on your neck. So a yoke that we're familiar with, not so much these days because we've got tractors, but in the old days was a yoke they would put on oxen or cattle to plow. So you think about it. What does that yoke do to that pair of oxen? Okay. Firstly, that yoke gives the farmer control. Someone else has control. Number one. Number two, there is a serious curtailment of your freedom. That you are no longer able to just go off and do your own thing because you've been yoked. So you lose your freedom. And the other thing, which is equally important, is you now have to cooperate, maybe with this other cow and with the farmer who's driving you. But you know what stuns me about that whole idea, folks, is that what Jesus is saying is he's saying here, I have a yoke, something that is designed to constrain you. I want to put it on you, but you have to reach out your hand and take it and put it on you. No force here, no manipulation, no coercion. You take my yoke upon you, willingly, of your own choice. And you know what that feels like to me? It feels like if we're to make any progress in life at being successful, including our decision making, there is something fundamentally and profoundly important about this yieldedness and this submission that we're supposed to have towards Him. That we're supposed to put our neck down and accept restraints from Him upon our lives, and to lose some of our freedom. Now that is challenging. If you're a person who's independent, don't like people telling you what to do, determined to always go your own way, you got a problem, buster. Because Jesus wants to curtail that. Do you know why? Because as long as you go your own way, you're going to make wrong decisions. That's the reality of life. Go your own way, you'll make wrong decisions. So in love, He comes and He says, for goodness sake, how often are you going to walk into that brick wall and bloody your forehead? Because you want your own way. Let me restrain you. And so it's this loving restraint that He wants to put on us. Okay, pause. Can I ask you a question? How submitted are you to God? Have you had a moment in your life where you bow your head and your knee and you've surrendered and said, your will be done, not mine? Okay, honest question. How many of you have found that or find that notion difficult, entertaining the thought? I tell you what, that is difficult. As a young Christian in Zimbabwe, I was petrified of doing that. Because I thought, I know what's going to happen. If I so much as let go control of my life and give it to God, He's going to send me a missionary to a jungle in the middle of nowhere in darkest Africa, and I'm going to hate it. He sent me to the wild natives of Esher instead, so. But, that's the fear. If I surrender. Yet that's what He's calling us to. So He says, take my yoke upon you. And then He says, now learn from me. So the picture here is it's not another cow we yoke to, it's Him. He binds us to Him so that as He moves and we move with Him, we begin to observe Him. How does He deal with things? How does He do life? How does this man work? How does he think that way? What is He saying we're supposed to do? And He says, see in that close proximity of you watching me. Now do what I do. Learn from me. And out of that comes a brand new way of making decisions. And folks, I think that is the place where you and I can begin to make right decisions. From a place of being yielded, submitted, willing to go His way, not our own. That's the beginning of making wise decisions. And unfortunately, okay, let me throw this out as a question before I say that, okay? How many of you have a forehead made of cast iron that when you hit a wall because you went your own way, you simply bounce back and carry on? Come on. Confession. Sometimes it takes repeated blow after blow after blow for us to come to that place of saying, okay, I give up. But it does. But then there's another beautiful part here. Okay. Why does He urge that? Why does He urge this yoking this close companionship with him, where your decisions are affected by him so that you no longer have that level of freedom. He says these beautiful words. He says, "For I'm gentle and humble in heart." I'm gentle and humble in heart. Folks, I don't know if you've ever come under somebody who tried to influence you. They were assertive, harsh, aggressive, overbearing, critical, domineering, arrogant. Any of you had somebody in your life like that? Hands up if you didn't learn a thing from them. You don't learn a thing from them. It's totally ineffective. You know what Jesus says? He says, "You'll find I'm humble and I'm gentle." That's the place all of us can flourish and grow. When people are humble and gentle. And he says, "I will be that to you." He's not trying to be right, not trying to be seen, not full of self-interest, pride, just humbly and gently wanting to do what's best for you. Beautiful words. And you know, folks, that is why you find that, and certainly Hazel and I found this in so much of our years of being a Christian, is that when people encounter God, when they have an experience with him, so often it brings them to tears, because what they encounter is a person who's loving, humble, and gentle. And that is the most soothing balm for the soul. And that's why we can willingly become yoked to him, because of the balm he is to our soul, because of who he is as a person. And so he says to them, if you'll do that, what does he offer them? He says, you will find rest for your souls. You'll find a home for your soul, a resting place. And then he ends off in verse 30, and he says, for this is the truth about the yoke I want to put on you. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. Not like the other things people will put on you. Mine is easy. And you know what that word easy means? Better for you, a good fit, manageable, and pleasant. Meaning, see all those other burdens that have been put on you. None will be as good as the one I put on you. The one I put on you will actually fit. The yoke I put on will fit best for your life. Isn't that incredible? So do you know what we find here, folks? Well, yeah, we find him saying, take my yoke upon you. And initially we're clamoring to, nope, I don't want that level of control over me. You know, I don't want someone else to control my decisions. And then when you work your way through it, you find, wait a minute. All those restraints you put on me actually worked for my best. It's the best possible fit for my life. And then we begin to actually enjoy the yoke because it works better than anything else we've ever tried. It says, my yoke is easy. My burden is light. So folks, let's just wind this up, okay? The beginning place to make good decisions in your life really is rooted in this whole thing of yielding and submitting to him to do life his way. To accept the restraints he would put on you, knowing full well that those restraints will bring about the best possible outcome for your life if we will yield and learn from him and do life his way. Do you know, folks, do you know what hope is being penned in these words? You and I, if we're yoked with him, can make good decisions right decisions that will lead to positive outcomes instead of negative ones. Isn't that what we're all wanting? We're wanting to make good decisions so that we can have the best possible outcome for our lives. And it begins with a personal relationship with Him where we yield and submit. Folks, I want to stress this so much to you. You need to prioritize your faith. If you want the very best for your life, you need to prioritize your faith. You need to do whatever you can to grow in your faith so that you can learn from Jesus on how to do life. And you'll have the best possible outcome. It's the only way to make good decisions. So when you're under pressure, be very careful about the decisions you make. Okay? Don't make any decision until you've gone through that process. I come, I submit, I yield. And then make your decision. Next week I hope to try and unpack that a bit as to how we can know that, okay? But that's the beginning.